Hello everyone, and good to be with you again. I just had this random thought a few minutes ago. I probably am dating myself for sure, but do you happen to remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? Well, if not, look it up. I was thinking, man, I have not heard Mr. Rogers' theme song in quite a while. So, of course, looked it up on YouTube or whatever, and wow, I just think that is so cool. But I'm corny like that. And I was thinking, how cool would that be to come up with my own little theme song like Mr. Rogers? Because I'm just that cool. No, no, I'm not. But who knows? Maybe. Um, Maybe I'll come up with my own little Mr. Rogers style theme song. You'd have to tune in just for that, right? Okay, enough of that. Anyway, I've actually really been looking forward to doing this video. I think this is probably going to be the last video in this Romans 12:2 series, but I'm not going to count that out for sure. There may be another one, but I have a feeling that this is probably going to wrap this up and we'll move on to something different next time. But so still in Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so just for a quick little visit back to that picture, I think in the very first video talking about being transformed, which is like a metamorphosis versus being conformed. And so there's this one circle over here, and we might change within this one circle, right? Being conformed to different things. But then there's this other circle over here, and transformed means that we literally leave this circle over here and we transform, we move completely beyond this whole different place, whole different way of thinking and living, and a whole different set of beliefs and values and norms, and just everything is totally different. So it's really a very radical concept when we talk about being transformed. So in this video, put the fire out, breathe, move forward. That's the title of this video. So what are we really talking about there? As I said today in the prior video, we're going to be talking about desire, urges, impulse, and what type of effect does that have on our living? How do we deal with all of that? Because we're going to have desires, we're going to have urges, but what do we do with that? Because we get caught in these destructive cycles, right? We allow these, I think it's in James 15, where it talks about if once desire gives birth to sin, then sin gets a hold of us basically, and it comes into full bloom and brings forth death. Something like that. I don't have the exact scripture memorized, but it talks about that is once desire takes hold in our life, once we give it a place to actually to be born and to take up space within us, then it brings forth sin. And then once sin is allowed to really come into fullness within us, then that brings forth death. And that paints the picture kind of like a fire, right? My wife is so good at making fire, and she is the champ at taking kindling and setting it up just right in its little teepee, and she's just really good at doing all of that. And I really admire her skill set in doing those things. So we have this long-standing joke, or story actually, of this time we went camping, and I went out and found this it's one of those big fish stories, right? I went out and found this massive, this huge log. It was 100 feet. But found this massive log, brought it back in the truck to the campsite, rolled it off the tailgate onto the ground, and she's like, "That will never burn." But I'm sure as it went, she probably made the most awesome kindling. Somehow we got it elevated up, and that massive log burned all night. So we both brought something to the situation there. So I'm proud of that story, and it gives me something to look back on and smile on. But anyway, back to the point. So with kindling, it's like desire. So once that kindling takes to the spark, right, begins to burn, and that brings forth a small fire. So that brings forth, as comparing to James 1:15, it brings forth the sin. And then once that fire begins to build and we begin to stoke that fire and begin to put wood on it and let it build up. So like sin, once we begin that process of giving into that urge, right, that desire, that place we find ourselves of wanting something. That's right. That's really desire, I think, at its core, is that we want something. So it's like, okay, well, I want this thing, so we give a place to it. Let's go after it. It'll make me feel good, because now that I want it, there's tension there. So now that there's tension there, I want to feel gratified from this. I want to be set free from this. I want to have peace and just let this tension be resolved. And so that builds and builds and builds until we give ourselves over to it, and then it's resolved, and then we're gratified. So it's like the fire, right? It's like sin. That fire builds and builds and builds until it comes into full bloom, and it's just full on raging fire. And so now what is it doing? It's consuming. So we have to keep putting wood in the fire to satisfy it, to keep it burning, to keep it just like in the last video. And that's so lovely. But we have to keep feeding it. So anyway, just kind of an interesting picture of how that works. It starts out small, starts out with desire, moves into an urge, and with an urge there's a powerful force that is motivating us. Think of an urge like that, some kind of an external force that is motivating us to complete that urge. And then an impulse is what I will say like a type of urge. It's more spontaneous in nature. We just feel something, and then we're just so conditioned. We've so conditioned ourselves that we just, as soon as we feel it, we do it. And usually that's because we've conditioned ourselves over time to just give into this. Well, this is my desire. This is what I want to do. This is what I have to do to gratify that desire. I do this, and this is just how things play out, right? All the time. And so it just becomes automatic. It gets into our subconscious, and so it's just on auto. This is just, when we feel this is what we do. Feel a certain way, eat a quart of ice cream, whatever. Making a little lighthearted humor there, but you get the point. Okay, and I read something that I thought was really interesting. It was talking about how, looking at my notes here, but every time an urge arises, right? Every time an urge comes up, if we learn to pause, we have to learn to identify the urge. We have to learn to identify, well, what am I desiring, first of all? What is my desire? And then we have to move into, okay, now there's an urge. There is a force that is now pushing me to fulfill my desire, to move into this urge phase. So we have to learn to put a pause, a space, if you will, in between that point, between the time that urge comes up and between the time that we actually respond. So I talked a little bit about stimulus in the last video. So we have we have desire, we have this stimulus that enters the picture that stimulates us. And so that moves us now into this urge to fulfill what we feel by being stimulated. We want to gratify that and then release that tension to be free from that. And so when I say, like the title of this video, put the fire out, that is a physiological, what I'll call a physiological process. So we have to put the fire out first. I've listened to different videos and just given this thought, but oftentimes when we as people are hurting in a given area of our life, and someone may, very well meaning, okay, someone may say, well, let me pray for you, and which is great. I'm a huge believer in prayer. I love times of prayer with the Lord. So prayer, very important. Please don't misunderstand me here. But there is a fire that is raging. And so it's like, yes, prayer is wonderful. Do that. But first, take this big bucket of water, please, and just put out the fire. That is my very basic, first, immediate need. Put this fire out. And that's what we've got to do first. Sorry, I kicked the stand there. We've got to put the fire out. And then we've got to breathe, right? We've got that pause that we have to put in there. And we have to break that cycle. So first we've got to put the fire out. Then we've got to learn to identify our desires, where our desires are coming from. We've got to look at what our urges are, what impulses we have going on in our life, and then begin to move on from there, begin to grow and mature in this process from there. But first, put the fire out. So I can already tell I'm at 12 minutes, so I've got to wrap this up, and we are going to have another video, probably, I hope will be the last one on this series. But things like, first, treat the physiological process. When you're feeling that tension come up within you, do things like close your eyes, clench and unclench your fists, and just think about what that feels like and what's going on. And while you're doing that, breathe in. And then breathe out and release. Think about your lungs constricting and expanding, and your fists clenching and letting loose, and just everything involved in that process. And so that will help to relieve and bring down the level of anxiety that you may be feeling in a given situation that are coming from that desire and urge. So I'm going to wrap up the video with that, but do things like that. Practice clenching and unclenching your calves, your hands. Do visualizations of being on a beach and feet in the sand, and closing your eyes and breathing through those things. And that will help to release that immediate on fire desire to gratify an urge. So let's stop there and look forward to getting into the rest of this next time. Love you all. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.